The following video is entirely based on interviews and stories reported by other media outlets, which we collect and curate in an attempt to provide one coherent and well-rounded history piece from the world of professional wrestling.
Support WrestleTalk!
Order a t-shirt.
Ric Flair has been hailed as one of the best of all time, and with only a short run in the WWF in the early 90s, he was best known for being part of WCW. But due to disagreements with Eric Bischoff, Flair nearly jumped ship to rival company WWF in 1998. I am Luke Owen, and this is Ric Flair's missing WWF run. 1998 was a very hot year for the WWF, with business at an all-time high, a megastar WWF champion in Stone Cold Steve Austin, and a feud so hot between Austin and Vince McMahon that Raw finally beat WCW's Nitro in the ratings for the first time in 83 weeks. It was during this time that Ric Flair had a falling out with WCW and its executive producer Eric Bischoff. Shortly after the episode of Raw that beat Nitro in the ratings, Ric Flair missed a taping for WCW's second TV show Thunder, which reportedly would have seen him reunite the Four Horsemen. According to Flair, he had given the company plenty of notice that he wouldn't be available for that day as his son Reid Flair was competing in the AAU Freestyle Wrestling Championships. According to Brian Alvarez and R.D. Reynolds' book The Death of WCW, Flair found out he was set to appear on Thunder 3 days before the show and wasn't prepared to change his plans. Dave Meltzer wrote in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Bischoff was livid and openly talked about either firing Flair, which would be the irrational move given the lay of the land today, or suspending him, which appears to be the most likely alternative. Flair had already received legal threats from WCW regarding being under contract for 3 years with a nice-sized raise, but allegedly having business negotiations with the WWF. As it turns out, Flair was in negotiations with WWF to make a return to the company, which was furthered when WCW filed a $2 million lawsuit against Flair for missing Thunder and playing havoc with the script of WCW's wildly popular productions, and disrupting WCW's ability to introduce its planned storyline, causing significant loss in time, money, and effort by WCW. The idea was to debut Flair at Unforgiven 1998, which was being held in Greensboro, North Carolina, the heart of Flair country. According to Cornette and Flair, the plan was to have Rick sit in the front row with his son Reid, and Jim Ross was going to promote throughout the show that he would be interviewing a great wrestling champion, with the idea that the home audience and live crowd would figure they were talking about Flair. However, when the interview time actually comes, Ross would walk past Rick and interview Reid Flair because he had won the AAU Freestyle Wrestling Championships. Cornette recalls, when Flair came in and sat down in the front row during the first match, people would have blown sky high, and then for Jim Ross to say, "We have a great wrestling champion in the front row we'd like to congratulate," and go over and interview Reid, and Rick is just sitting there never saying a word. It would have been the greatest appearance of all time. Flair added on his podcast, "I would have died for that moment." On his podcast Something to Wrestle, Bruce Pritchard says the angle never happened because Flair got cold feet. As seemed to be commonplace with Rick, we would get to a point in negotiations, and I think he always felt more comfortable with the NWA and stayed there. Flair, on the other hand, argues it was much closer than that, with both him and Cornette revealing that Flair and Reid were in a car circling the Greensboro Coliseum on the night of the pay-per-view, waiting for WWF and Flair's lawyers to agree terms. The problem was that there would have been legal ramifications of Flair appearing on a WWF broadcast while still under contract to WCW, and Flair says his lawyers finally told him not to go in the building. "It was just one of those deals because I was dying to do it. I wanted to stick it up WCW's butt." The other side of the story is that Arn Anderson and all those guys wanted me to come back to WCW. I was already torn. In The Death of WCW, Alvarez and Reynolds write that Flair filed a countersuit against WCW so he could go to the WWF and work a program with Steve Austin. And Bischoff was made aware of this, so he dropped his $2 million lawsuit against Flair in order to have him stay. In May, Dave Meltzer wrote in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, the two sides were said to still be at an impasse, but apparently at least a somewhat cordial impasse. Although Flair has said that he wasn't sure what the plans would have been for him had he gone to the WWF in 1998, Jim Cornette revealed on his Talking Sense podcast he would have worked with Stone Cold Steve Austin. He would have gotten over. He wouldn't have been jobbed out. He would wouldn't have been made to look like a fool. Everyone in a top spot, Undertaker, Austin, Rock, would have relished the opportunity to work at that point in time with Ric Flair. I wish it had happened. We've got other WWE Backstage Exposé videos here on WrestleTalk, so click the playlist to the left to check those out. Support this channel by subscribing and pledge on Patreon for exclusive podcast content. I have been Luke Owen, and that was wrestling.